Good morning or good day. This is Paul Chek. Welcome back to the challenges of mouth breathing. Today we're going into part 2, psychological. In the first part of this program, I just did an overview. Today we'll do the psychological. In my next edition, we will look at genetic and structural issues, and we will then look at the biochemical issues of mouth breathing. There's a lot to this. Today we're going to look at the psychological elements, and there's many causes, and many of these things that are psychological have to do with a mix of all the other causes that would be represented in each of the 3 parts of this series. Today I'm going to look at the most common issues that relate to mouth breathing from a psychological standpoint. The first thing I want to point out is if you take all the emotions that we feel, and remember, emotions trigger thoughts and thoughts trigger emotions. If you didn't have emotions, you would not know you were thinking. You would have no sense of feeling the thought. It would be like a hose that doesn't know water's running through it. If a hose had emotions, emotion, energy moving, it would feel the water moving through it. That would make it, shall we say, alive. So, at the very root of our emotional experience, which is what determines our response biologically to our thoughts, we have 2 root emotions. Fear, which I relate to yang, which correlates with the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, and love, which relates to yin and correlates with the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, love correlates with the parasympathetic nervous system because the parasympathetic nervous system is not only linked to growth, development, regeneration, repair, but it's also linked to learning because the parasympathetic nervous system is connected to right brain activity, which is the brain of wholeness and making connections, how things work together. Whereas the sympathetic system is linked to not to connection, but to fight or flight reactions or getting more work done, but a narrow focus and links up to the left brain activity of your dialogue or your story. So our left brain looks at things like mathematics, it isolates things, it names and labels things, and it tends to put things into a sequence. For example, if you write a sentence or a story, you need left brain activity. It takes all the vast information of the right brain and then sequences it. So left brain activity is good and it's necessary, just like right brain activity. Left brain activity is also very, very important when you're under a survival threat because left brain activity is largely based on information that you already have. The right brain is very much open to new information and is constantly out searching for it. You could say left brain is more of an intellectual pursuit, the right brain is more of a creative, poetic, intuitive functioning element of the brain. So consider that when we look at these balance-imbalance issues. Now, love is also important because whenever we love, we have a willingness to connect, a willingness to explore, a willingness to include. For example, many people throughout my career have always asked me, how can you remember so much stuff? And I always tell them, I can remember a lot of things because I studied the things that I truly had a love or an interest for, not what other people told me to study to pass courses or things like that. In other words, if I was taking the course, it's because I wanted to be there. If I was doing it, it's because I wanted to, and I had some passion for what I was doing. So whenever you emotionalize in a loving or positive way what you're studying, it is much more likely to stay in the nervous system. Love is also a connecting function. Whenever we're acting out love-based emotions, we are staying connected to the person that we're with. It doesn't necessarily mean you may not have challenges. Any of you that's been in a relationship, I'm sure, knows there's challenges. Most of us had challenges with our parents, but we loved our parents. The difference is that you can maintain balance in the autonomic nervous system. If you are dealing with a challenge with someone you love, you stay connected. You don't create an enemy out of them. You just work through dialogue or conversation, however you want to work through it. But usually the system maintains a balance, just like when you're driving a car. You never hold the wheel still. Sometimes it's wandering a little bit here and there, and you just adjust. Love, you stay connected to the individual, just like you stay connected to the road when you're driving the car. Fear excludes. So whenever you go into a fear-based mode of relating to yourself or others, they are now separate from you. Fear is the equivalent of saying no, to exclude. Love is the equivalent of saying yes, to include. Okay? Whenever we are acting out of fear, particularly if it's chronic, not only do we feel separation, but that separation leads to isolation. And that isolation can become very psychologically painful. Many, many people feel isolated from their parents, from their family members, from teachers, from co-workers, from friends, from the world, from everybody. Also, if your body gets too unhealthy, your research by Claire Graves, and you can see a lot of this in Ken Wilber's work, Maslow, a variety of other people that looked at values memes or value structures. Meme means idea. What are the common ideas that people live out? Whenever people are basically trapped in a state of separation and not feeling well, their body's unhealthy or diseased or injured, they become what I call I-centric. They get totally self-focused, which is a survival mechanism. And if we stay in that state, which so many people in society are, we can actually have a lot of problems in relationships because we're often unaware that we're not relating to the other people. We're making everything about what we want or what we need, or the story is poor me, victim behavior, sabotage behavior, woulda, shoulda, coulda, didn't dialogue, and it's always somebody else's fault. So that leads to a lot of conflict in relationships with self and others. So we want to try to be aware of when this is happening and what's causing it, and that's what I'm going to try to share a little bit with you today. Now, this is obviously a very comprehensive topic. I'll show you later in my resources. I go into this in great deal in my holistic lifestyle coaching program, and you begin learning about these types of things right in Exercise Coach in the Chek Practitioner program. And then in Chek Level 4, we go into it quite deeply because it is very, very deep. So now that you understand the root emotions and how they affect the autonomic nervous system, we now want to look at the most common cause of psychological sources of mouth breathing, which is classically a fear reaction. Then I'm going to finish by showing you what happens if you act out a fear-based ideology and how that overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system produces changes in your body that are not only unfavorable, but they magnify the problem. So you can get into a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And your Groundhog Day gets to be worse and worse. The Groundhog Day comes back, but each day you live this way, you got more and more problems, as I'll show you. And obviously, the medical system isn't addressing this at the cause, and it's making truckloads of money off of the problem. So that's another thing. If you don't take this matter into your own hands, and you think someone else is going to fix you or save you, you're probably naive. So what are the causes that lead to psychological sources of mouth breathing? I discussed fear-based thinking, autonomic stress, and imbalance. Current research cited by Deepak Chopra showed that the average person thinks 68,000 thoughts a day. Other researchers have identified that on average that about 90% of those thoughts in the average person have a negative orientation, which would relate to fear-based thinking or separation. The concept negative thinking or negative orientation is almost always judgment-based thinking, separational. That ass, this guy, it's the government's fault. It's all kind of entangled thinking. When you get into a lot of this type of thinking, you can tend to, even in family relationships, spousal relationships, love relationships, there's a real tendency to blame the other person for your problems, which is victim behavior. And the saying I'd like you to remember is that holding on to negative judgments about other people when they're no longer serving you, shall we say, is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The problem is that you hold these negative emotions in your body, and great research now shows that they do actually trigger significant physiological changes, such as negative changes in the hormonal system. Just remember, if you're in a state of love or happiness, you produce happy chemicals. If you're in a state of negative orientation, which 90% of people's thoughts are, you're producing, we'll just call them unhappy chemicals or stress reaction chemicals. So we want to be aware that the way we're thinking has pretty much everything to do with our psychological profile. And as we get into negative orientations, we see mouth breathing occur as a stress response. The next common cause of fear-based thinking or psychological causes of mouth breathing are parental, social, and religious conditioning. Conditioning means that you are programmed to behave in a certain way. If you just look at, go on Google and search Pavlov's dog, you'll get a very simple explanation. There's many cartoons if you search Google images of conditioning. But conditioning means believing things, whether they're true or not, acting in ways that do not serve you, even though you know it's not working. I won't go into it in too great a detail because I discussed this at great length and it's a really deep topic. So where are we getting a lot of this conditioning besides parental exposure and family exposure? We're getting it from television. There's a lot of money being made off of conditioning you to live a fear-based life. Think of all the drug commercials. If you haven't had a scan, you might die of such and such a disease. Here's Mrs. Smith, who went in for a routine checkup and found out she was almost going to die in 2 weeks, and we saved her with our miracle whatever. Okay? Look at all the insurance commercials. Did you know that there's this many percentage of people that crash their cars and that this many people get broken into? It's all horseshit, basically, designed to keep you profitable. And as long as you want to be giving your money away to people for being crafty crooks, then, that's okay. If that's part of your dream, it's working for you. You don't need my help. So media in general, newspapers, magazine articles, radio, any form of media, and one of the big ones that really concerns me today is video games, especially for kids. There is so much stuff in video games that is programming children when their minds do not have enough knowledge to differentiate fantasy from reality, that you get kids thinking things like, wow, you can shoot these people and they just pop back up. So you can actually program children to have very, very distorted views of life. You can also get kids who think from all this destructive video games that the way you solve your problems is by being destructive in general. So we're really using a very, very negative orientation that is not inspiring our children to become something that is love-based but is totally fear-based. And that leads to a life of body-mind disorders, and the world is full of that stuff. So if you're letting your kids play these video games when they're not adequately developed to distinguish reality, in other words, if they don't have an adequately developed ego, and the ego doesn't fully form till age 21, my personal belief is that you should not buy negatively oriented, destructive video games for kids at all until they can afford to earn their own money and go to the store by themselves. By that time, they should have enough common sense to be able to differentiate real life from fantasy. One of the problems that comes from all this is myth challenges. The word myth can be translated as story in metaphor. So your life may be like the life of a princess, it may be like the life of a king, it could be like the life of a god, maybe a Viking god or Thor or somebody like that. You can find a parallel between a story in your life, or shall we say there is some kind of a metaphorical connection. Now, if your myth relates to your story, and a lot of the programming that people are exposed to as children is religious. Religions are heavily based on mythological concepts and ideas. In other words, the concept of parting the Red Sea, for example, is a mythological expression of something that didn't physically happen, of course, but people believe this stuff. And so without bashing religion and making it about that, I just want to make the point that religions are often myth-based ideologies, and they are is misinterpreted as actual fact and lived out as actual fact, which leads to a lot of disruption in families and distorted upbringing and fear-based thinking in children. I can't tell you how many times I've had to help people heal, particularly from the fear-based thinking program into kids by the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Now, a lot of the problems that we incur in our life, health problems, relationship problems, financial problems, are actually a gift from the universe. If you look at what your story is, your challenges are indicators of a counter myth. So if you believe, for example, that Jesus is the only begotten Savior, inevitably you're going to run into people that don't believe that, and you're also going to run into a lot of people that have different beliefs that are often much more wholesome and happy within themselves. So to the degree that you have evidence in pain or in observation that your story is not working, the universe, shall we say, is providing you with evidence of a counter myth. So whenever you're having mouth breathing from psychological issues such as I'm describing, look at what the environment is telling you. Look at what your relationships are telling you. And instead of playing games with yourself, pay close attention to the evidence moving toward you. And if your life feels like it's more stressful than joyful, it means it's time to create a counter myth. What is a new dream affirmative story that you can create for yourself and live out that's more likely to help you become a well-balanced, centered individual that contributes to your own life and therefore to the world itself? Next, low self-esteem, which is a side effect of all this stuff and all the things I'll discuss in this program, but usually low self-esteem, in my opinion, relates most broadly to your parental upbringing and the influences that your parents and family had on you, and even the school system can really induce a lot of low self-esteem. For example, kids that have higher intelligence often get bored in class and often ask questions that teachers can't answer or don't want to answer, so they're belittled, and I was one of them. I know all about it. So if a child isn't, shall we say, adequately supported by the parents, then they can feel like they're in a world full of stupid people, people that don't understand them or don't care, and that can lead to low self-esteem. Biochemical causes, there's many causes of low self-esteem, but most of it boils down to not believing in yourself because you have been programmed by other people to think you're less than beautiful, less than intelligent, etc. Number 4 is a head detached from the body. This is as common as breath itself today. And this is what happens when our culture becomes overly intellectualized, and lo and behold, you can track this right back to, if you read Ken Wilber's book or listen to the audio, A Brief History of Everything, he gives you a very nice history of how our education system was developed and shows you, I won't go into it, but shows you how basically our intellectual systems of training or schools are not designed to actually teach you to be creative or to do anything except follow orders for the rich people, which is still going on like crazy. And to give you an example of that, if you look at the 4 learning styles, mathematical, logical, which is only 5 to 8% of people, kinesthetic, which is about 15%, auditory, which is, I don't know what it is, it's the next largest one, and visuals, about 38 to 40%. 90 to 95% of all information imparted in educational institutions is by way of mathematical logical teachings, which means written word, and only 5 to 8% of people learn that way, yet we have organizations, institutions full of experts at teaching that learn this in their very basic education but continue to teach you in a way that is ineffective because they themselves are programmed by the system and are numb to the fact that the very way that they're teaching is ineffective, but it's designed to be that way because it allows the large corporate entities to create people that act out exactly what they want you to do in television commercials, radio, ads, newspapers, etc. And look how many people, for example, believe the news hour. Come on, that's Hollywood together. All you got to do to prove that to yourself is wait till any major event is going on in the world. For example, when 9/11 happened, I was all the way over in Europe, traveling through Europe and England, and so I was watching news reports each day as I was moving in different countries. So if you, for example, were to watch the news report in France, you'd get the down and dirty. If you watched it in London, you'd get something a little closer to reality, but then if you come to the United States, the same issues are presented completely differently, and you realize that the media is completely crafting stories to get you to believe in the villain they want you to believe in, etc. So our heads have become detached from our bodies because as part of religion and corporate entities and media-driven stuff and poor schooling, we have come to believe ideas more than we believe the experience we're having. And now you have kids all over the world that don't even know what common farm animals and foods are. So when we get people to the point that they're living on Facebook and living in the media and not spending time with their body, exercising, breathing, moving, and having a life that requires awareness of the body. For example, I like to stack rocks because you can get hurt doing it. And I go barefoot and barehanded, so I have to stay aware of the environment and I have to interact with my body. You can't have an idea out there stacking rocks and a body that's not participating or you'll get killed. So my point is we've got a culture now that lives vicariously watching television, is very, very under-exercised, very poorly fed, very malnourished, and very, very in love with the internet, movies, TVs, video games, and other people's ideas. So they sit for hours and hours working on computers, entertaining themselves on computers and on televisions, and their bodies get sicker and sicker, and as you can see by the statistics, more and more obese and unhealthy. So you get people that forget that they've got to go to the toilet, and so they get constipated, they get bladder infections, they forget to eat and have blood sugar handling problems, they forget to exercise, and they even forget to breathe. I've had clients that literally stop breathing and have all sorts of chemical problems because they don't realize they're holding their breath, which is again part of this whole syndrome. So to the degree that you're having symptoms in your body and have had symptoms for any length of time, we'll call that chronic, and you're running around getting other people to fix it and you're not paying attention to the fact that, for example, every time you eat something like bread or gluten, your body gets swollen or your bowel movements change or your energy levels change or your mental function changes. If you're not attached to what's happening when you put inputs such as food and drink into your body and you keep doing it, clearly you're detached. By the time you become obese or sick, you've been not paying attention to your body for a very, very long time. That's what happens when the head is cut off from the body. It's one of the most dangerous things that can happen to your body. And what's even more dangerous is running around to doctors and surgeons thinking they're going to fix it for you, or getting liposuction, or having surgical alterations of your body to try to make your body look good when it's really out of pure negligence that it doesn't look good anyhow. We're all born with beauty in us. Healthy bodies are beautiful bodies. then it's just a matter of opinion. But a beautiful person, obese, becomes an obese person. A beautiful person or a beautiful child that doesn't eat and live well and lives fear-based thinking becomes an unattractive person. And then you get a beautiful body that's surgically altered, but when you get to know a lot of these people, you can see that what's inside isn't very attractive. They got a lot of mind viruses that are hard to deal with. Okay? Next, no dream or goal worth living for, worth growing for, worth participating in, worth taking on the challenges of the process of creating something that's exciting and worth doing in your life, so you feel like you're really engaged in life. You know, there's a lot of learning to do. Life is very rich and very, very full. Instead of watching movies, produce one. Get a camera, have fun. Instead of watching sports, play sports. Instead of watching people have sex, find a partner and have some sex. If you don't exercise and you get into some good sex, at least you get a workout in. And maybe you work in too, depending on how you go about it. Now, the number one cause of not having a dream is usually being raised by parents that didn't have a dream. A lot of people, and I am a professional therapist with 32 years of experience now, and I've coached and counseled countless thousands, and when I do very detailed assessments on people and use comprehensive questionnaires to look at psychological profiles, such as an adult attachment interview, what we find is that a lot of people have attachment and detachment issues from their childhood. Attachment means overly attached to mommy usually, and detachment means not interested in mommy or daddy. These cause children to be raised in a very, very imbalanced way and lead to a lot of psychological stress, criminality, disease, etc. Now, in Dan Siegel's work, Dr. Dan Siegel, MD, I highly recommend you look into his research and books. Mindsight is a great one to look into. He showed the number one cause of attachment and detachment disorders when they surveyed large numbers of families with kids that had these problems was parents that did not have a sense of direction in life. That is exactly the same thing as saying parents that have no dream, goal, or objective bigger than their, shall we say, narcissism or social programming. I'm so busy working, I don't have time to be with my kids. That said, I know how hard that can be in our culture because we're all, so shall we say, trapped in it. We've lost our tribal structure. So there's a lot of real deep problems. That said, we can't just blame it on the world and blame it on religion. We have to realize that all of our challenges are opportunities for growth and creativity, and there's as much information in the chaos in our life as there is in the order in our life. So if your life feels very chaotic, don't run from it. Look into it. Look into the dark. That's what meditation is very, very helpful for. That's what working in, all the work in principles I teach my students is about looking into yourself and finding the value. PPS Success Mastery Lesson 1, How to Find and Live Your Legacy or Your Overarching Dream, takes you deeply into an exploration of your parental and social programming. And PPS Lesson 2 shows you how the mind is programmed or brainwashed, and I show you how to use the basic science of brainwashing to wash the garbage out of your brain and reprogram yourself to be dream affirmative. And then 6 biochemical imbalances, which is food, drink, and environment, which we'll talk about in a later section in more detail. Now, when you have these problems or any combination thereof, most people have a combination of them, as you can imagine. If you have more stress going on in your mind and body, then you can effectively balance, which means more stress than you can take on and stay healthy. A person who lives a labor of love can stay healthy. Someone like me can work out really hard and rebound healthfully. I can go through relationship challenges and not get a whole bunch of this stuff going on because I'm willing to stay connected to or have a healthy separation with coworkers or whoever it may be. In other words, when I say healthy separation, I'm not responsible for how they feel. but I can stay intact with my dream and my integrity because I'm acting out of my own goals and values, so I don't feel disabled when I'm centered in my own decision. It's not our responsibility to make everybody else happy or agree with us, but it is our responsibility to be a human being in our relationships. And your body never lies. That's the one thing you got to remember. Your body does not have a mechanism for telling a lie. So, as Arnold Patton says, if something's happening in your life and you don't think you wanted it or that you created it, look carefully at what you're creating unconsciously. In other words, your body is often showing you, and your breathing, which reacts immediately to your thoughts and emotions, is showing you what you're probably creating unconsciously, which is why PPS Success Mastery Lesson 2 is so important, because it brings the unconscious up where you can see it. So what are some of the things that will happen to you that will magnify or bring on mouth breathing if your sympathetic nervous system tone, the fight-flight branch of your nervous system, is too high? Let's run through. Well, as I said, increased mouth breathing, which comes with an increased heart rate and increased breathing rate. This also brings on, all of this fear-based thinking brings on other breathing pattern disorders. I'm only talking about mouth breathing. When I get into the structural section, I will show you some more of the patterns, but there's other problems. We can call them, most of them relate to abdominal bracing, which is getting ready for someone to hit you or something. You're always ready to kick some ass. You know, you're got that Rambo kind of background. You know, your bodybuilder that walks around flexing their abs, and the athlete who has to make sure everybody sees how puffy and strong they are, like a dog showing off. All that stuff gets magnified when you're in this state, because what does it boil back to? Low self-esteem. Okay? So as we have increased sympathetic tone, as we're going to have more fight, flight, freeze reaction. Whenever the sympathetic tone reaches a high enough level, then you get a fight, flight, freeze reaction. For example, you can have high sympathetic tone when you're doing a workout. If you're going for a run or a hard bike or rowing on a rowing machine, you have high sympathetic tone. That's normal. But what goes up has to come down and be balanced by the parasympathetic. So it's like a teeter-totter. If you go down and you don't move because sympathetic is jacked up, then that's not very fun and there's no balance there. But if you're doing a teeter-totter with your friend, you want to take turns going up and down, and each of you supports the whole activity. That's normal sympathetic reaction. But when you have fear-based thinking and psychological stress that's unnecessary because it could be alleviated through intelligent application of natural means and having a dream, then the sympathetic system gets jacked up, stays on too long. That's what I'm talking about here. The freeze reaction is a problem because it stops you from breathing and it locks your emotions down and it shuts your biochemistry down. It basically, shall we say, mummifies you in a body. So you become someone with this freeze reaction. Freeze reaction projected becomes depression, which becomes apathy. At least if you're in a fight or flight reaction, you're doing something about it and you're confronting for better or for worse, so you're getting feedback and at least you can do something about it. But if you just go sit in your room and turn into a bump on a log, then you get apathetic, and that's a dangerous place to be, especially if you're a parent. As we go into these increased sympathetic activities, the first thing that happens when you get negative thinking that triggers off a reaction like this is you get an elevation of adrenaline. And adrenaline winds the system up. It makes people very aggressive. It makes the mind jump around. It makes you become hypervigilant, surveying the environment for threats. And if you're living this way, you're constantly looking for threats, and you can easily become very combative. I'm sure some of you have experienced discussing things with people, and no matter what you say, it's wrong or it's negative, and they're just at you. That's a classic reaction of oversympathetic tone and too much adrenaline in the system. With the elevated adrenaline comes about elevated cortisol. Remember, these two hormones stimulate brain activity and alertness. So people that have a lot of this stuff, as we'll find later, have a real hard time sleeping quite often. They have a hard time, these are the people that say, I can't meditate. They're also the people that can't think of new ways to solve problems for reasons I'll explain. Well, I already did. They get stuck in the left brain. Too much of this activates the left brain, and as I say to my students, it's not a good idea to throw in a cartwheel when you're running from a lion. You'll end up being dinner, which means the brain and the nervous system are not designed to be creative under significant stress because it increases the risk of death. So you get trapped in a perpetual slow death is what happens. And there you see increased left brain activity, increased threat perception, increased musculoskeletal activation, which I said in the previous section, as the sympathetic tone goes up, muscle tone goes up because it's getting you ready to kick some ass. Think of when you're playing tennis and someone's about to serve the ball. Your tone goes up, you're sprung, you're ready. If you're going to do a sprint race, your sympathetic tone goes up, you're charged. If you're about to get into a boxing match, you're already like a spring. But if you live that way, it can be extremely exhausting on the system. And as I said, it leads to chronic tension in the musculoskeletal system. So if you have structural imbalances, they get worse. If you have joints out of place, it gets worse. If you are someone who chronically pops your joints and necks and backs, that's often, like I said earlier, an indication of elevated sympathetic tone. Because of all that activity and that chronic tension, it causes increased inflammation in the body. Your body cannot repair itself. Remember, the growth and repair system, the parasympathetic system, has to counterbalance sympathetic activity. But if you stay wound up, you can be wound up in your sleep. And often this comes with negative orientations in dreams, such as nightmares and negative dreaming. So your body's acting this out all night. You wake up tired. You wake up feeling like you need coffee. Okay? Inflammation produces heat in the body. So that is very exhausting to the body. The thermoregulatory system requires more energy than any other system in the body to run. Your thermoregulatory system involves your whole body. So when your body starts to get hot, it's very disruptive to your biochemistry, it's very disruptive to your thinking, and it produces more sympathetic activity if you're not careful. Inflammation disrupts pH balance in the body, acidity, alkalinity. pH is acidity and alkalinity. It makes you more acid. There's a lot of metabolic waste being produced by inflammation in the body. And if you disrupt pH, which is 99% of the time going to be more towards acid, or at least 90% of the time, you're opening the door wide for fungal and parasite infections. I can assure you that. Okay? Chronic stress from negative thinking and this type of stuff decreases immune function and opens the door wide for all sorts of ailments, skin problems, joint problems, organ problems, gland problems, all of which grounds you into your body in a negative way and makes you more self-oriented, which, as I said earlier, leads to lots of problems in relationships because you become, shall we say, someone else's dependent. It's always poor me, poor me. If you have this issue, you are going to have blood sugar imbalances very commonly because when you have a fight or flight reaction, the body releases a lot of blood sugar and triglycerides to give you fuel to act. So if you get pissed off, for example, in traffic and you're giving people the finger and yelling at people, which would probably be an exemplification of how you handle most of your relationships, then you're going to have all this energy liberated, but you're sitting in a car. If you got out and ran like hell or fought for yourself, you'd burn that energy up and pretty soon your body would normalize itself. But when you keep having fight or flight reactions because you're creating dragons in your own head and goblins in your own head, then you have high blood sugar, and because it's not being used, it's stressful to the nervous system and the brain, so then your body releases insulin to try to store this stuff. Then you go into a low blood sugar state, which triggers off binge eating, eating sugar, and with that insulin and low blood sugar comes low energy and also a lot of mental, emotional disruption, and aggressive moods come out of that. Think of what happens when you're really hungry. Well, you can have just eaten breakfast 10 minutes ago, have a food full of stomach, and act like an idiot in traffic, and then by the time you get to work, 20 minutes later, you think you're starving, and you're starting to eat cookies and drink coffee and sugar this and all that, and you are definitely going to screw yourself up. And those blood sugar imbalances lead to cravings, like I said, and those are usually the perfect food for fungal infections and parasite infections. And once you get a fungal infection and a parasite infection, I'll highlight this more later, you have now got potentially billions of organisms shitting and pissing in your body 24/7 while they're eating your organs and glands to bury their eggs. And that will seriously make your body acid, disrupt your biochemistry, and magnify stinking thinking. Next, as we go higher and higher in this, our learning ability diminishes. Remember, if you're stuck in your left brain, you're not open to new information. It's as though you're ignoring all the information from the right brain. But if you can convert that negative thinking to the process of saying, I'm getting feedback, I'm learning, the environment's telling me that my ideas aren't as good as I thought they were, all I got to do is upgrade my software and pay attention, then you will bring in the right brain hemisphere, the creative hemisphere, and convert that into something positive. So your learning ability can be brought back up just by interacting with the environment and taking responsibility for making better decisions and thinking better thoughts. Cravings I talked about. Fatigue is very, very common. This is a very, very costly energetic process that triggers poor sleep quality. And very few people sleep very well today. Huge amounts of money is made off drugs just to put people to sleep. A lot of people use alcohol at night to try to get rid of their stress, which in moderation is fine, but if it becomes your drug of choice, you got real problems. Alcohol, as I'll talk about possibly later, is one of the fastest ways to disrupt blood sugar ever and lead to all that problems. Poor sexual performance is a common side effect of this. A huge number of men and women suffer sexual performance challenges today. And as I've said in previous blogs, I've had 19-year-old athletic males get a hold of me to ask me how to get off of Viagra. That is the state of the young men of our nation who should be the strongest, most capable people, is our young, strong men. But now at 19 and 20 years of age, they can't even get an erection. I would say that's not good for every reason. Your I-ness, I said, causes relationship stress. You get trapped in yourself and you become one-sided. And to the degree you're trapped in yourself from fear, you almost always push people away in relationships and wonder why your life is so shitty. And you feel so alone. All this stuff brings on malnutrition because the more stressed you are, the more you shut down the parasympathetic system, which moves foods through your body. It's responsible for digestion, absorption, metabolism, assimilation, and elimination. So if you screw that system up, you're likely to get malnutrition, and stress is the #1 cause of leaky gut, which means it will damage the microvilli, the sites that absorb the nutrition in the small intestine, and can lead to scarring and lead to a lot of health problems. Naturally, with all this comes increased drug use, and it's usually not the use of what I would call good drugs. Many of the natural drugs that you can find or substances from nature have an adaptogenic effect, but they're, shall we say, synthesized correlates that the medical system produces for profit so they can patent the damn things, are usually highly toxic to the body. So anytime you can, get something that's a natural remedy instead of a synthesized remedy, you're going to decrease stress on your body. And there's much, much more. This is just a short encapsulation. I mean, you can study this stuff for years. There's so much information to be known here, but I've given you the basics. Now, what are we going to do about it? Well, one, what is the thing you love more than your problems? Right? As Jerry Wesh says, if you have a big enough dream, you do not need a crisis. Most people just live from crisis to crisis and become, hypochondriacs. Their problems is all they got to live for. So what do you love enough to grow for, live for, get emotionally involved in, and stay connected to? Once you have a love, you have a dream, now you have a direction on your compass, or you have a GPS coordinates. And once you have that GPS coordinates, you know that you need values and beliefs and behaviors that are dream affirmative, or you're forever going to run into the wall. 2, balance. That's what this stands for, balancing these two forces. So once you know what you want to do, look at your balance and what your body and your mind need relative to the task or the journey at hand. That's not hard to figure out. All you got to do is get my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. There's a series of questionnaires that will show you where you're out of balance and give you very complete and clear directions. About 90% of the people with all sorts of diseases and problems that come to see me from all over the world get better doing nothing but what's in this book. They just need someone to help them by coaching them through it. But most people could do that. And my book, The Last 4 Doctors You'll Ever Need ebook, will give you direction on how to set up dream affirmative 4-doctor goals. Values. So once you know what your values are your code for when do I say yes and when do I say no. That's what a value is. If someone tries to sell you a cheesy car and your value is I want to drive a Audi or Mercedes or a Lexus, and they try to sell you a Yugo or something that's just not part of your value system, you simply say no. So we already act out values. Most of us do it unconsciously, though. Okay? 3, there's only 3 choices you can make in a relationship to person, place, or thing. The optimal, what's best for everybody involved in the creation of your dream team. The suboptimal choice, what gives you instant gratification but usually causes pain, which is still positive because pain is feedback and you can do something with it. Or 3, do nothing, which means I either need more information before I can make a decision, or I don't want to engage in the relationship right now because it's breaking down to the point it's causing separation, not connection. So optimal, what's best for everybody involved in the creation of this dream. Suboptimal, instant gratification, trouble's on the way. 3rd, do nothing, need more information, or I need to call a timeout and disengage until the heat goes down and we can connect to each other as intelligent adults. Under 3, as I teach in my Holistic Lifestyle Coach program, you got to remember there's 3 primary hormones. Those 3 primary hormones basically have the greatest influence on the entire physiology of your body. Insulin, adrenaline, and cortisol. And those, if you know the basics of those hormones, they all feed into each other's activity. You can't separate those things. So anytime you have these kinds of problems, you have a 3 primary hormone imbalance. I'm trying to remember Diana Schwartzbein. If you read, look up the name Diana Schwartzbein, MD. She's got 2 good books if you want to read that would be great reading to prepare you for my Holistic Lifestyle Coach training program. And she goes into the 3 primary hormones. 4-doctor balance, like I said, relates to your values. So Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Happiness. Dr. Happiness means what is the dream I'm willing to live for, and what are the values that allow me to be in a state that I would call connected, happy, loving, or willing to continue to grow in that direction. So those are the most important things that you can do when you have these types of problems. There's also, I want to close by saying, remember, whenever you're having negative thinking, we'll call that yang. No thought can exist without its complementary opposite. I'm ugly can't exist without I'm beautiful. I'm not good enough can't exist without I am good enough. And your responsibility is the choice that you choose. And part of being an adult or being a mature, intelligent person is not believing things that people say to you when you yourself know it isn't true. If someone tells me I'm ugly, I just think it's funny. If they tell me I'm not intelligent, I think that's funny too, because I already know that I'm not ugly. I love me. I know I'm not unintelligent because I can see what I'm able to do for myself and the world every day. And it doesn't matter how smart you are, people will always tell you that. I have lots of people, just look at the comments on my YouTube channel. This guy's an idiot, he's fat, he doesn't know anything. Or that whole yin-yang concept is bullshit. I get comments like that all the time. You know, usually mouth breathers, I suspect. Now, for those of you that want more intensive help, you can get my 1, 2, 3, 4 for overcoming addiction, obesity, and disease audio workbook program at ppssuccess.com or chekinstitute.com. And that will take you through a guided process. It's about a 134-page workbook with 9 hours of audio explaining how the mental, emotional elements and how our mind works and how love really works in relationships. So that's part 2. I hope you enjoyed it. We will come back with part 3, which will be genetics and structure. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Paul Chek.